Hello, this is Fam Electric Ghost. We have Regina Fae on the line.
Hello.
Hi. So you can hear me okay?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Okay, great. Yep. So this is Fam Electric Ghost. We interview indie artists from around the world. We have Regina Fae on the line from the UK. And we're going to get ready to talk to you about all your music that you have up on the net and talk about your projects that are out there right now.
Yeah.
So the first question we always ask is, when did you first get into music and at what age?
I got into music when I was 10. I started learning the violin, and at first it was just performing classical stuff, but eventually I moved on to writing my own music.
So did you stay on the violin writing your own music, or you branch out to other instruments?
Well, by the time I was 19, I decided I should branch out to some other instruments as well, because I figured guitar was the easiest for writing my songs. And I just decided I would learn how to play. So I found some videos, I found some chords online, and after about a week, I actually went ahead and wrote my first song on the guitar called Charade.
Oh, that's interesting. Like I kind of, well, I was trained on a clarinet, and I realized you really
Hmm.
can't write pop music on a clarinet.
Yeah,
So I got like a keyboard when I was like 17. I bought a Roland, and then I just like bought all these books. And I'd been trained how to read sheet music, but for a wind instrument. And so then I had to kind of relearn music on a piano. It was totally different than playing a wind.
yeah,
Um, but it's the same. It's a writing instrument. So I found that like pianos and guitars are like the primary tools for singer songwriters.
yeah,
So so
definitely.
so you started to 19, 20. You released a debut album called Castle. Can maybe talk
Yeah,
about that?
so Castle was inspired by my experiences by my friends at uni because we called our uni Castle. So that's how that came to be. And I just found that writing songs was the best way of expressing myself. So I just went ahead and did it.
Now, did you ever write poetry before you got into songwriting? Because I've talked to a lot of songwriters. They're like their first attempts at like expression were like poetry, and then they found a way to turn them into songs. Or did you go right into like writing lyrics for songs?
Yeah, I did write a lot of poetry, and I did end up turning some of my older poetry into songs or getting inspiration from them later on, actually.
Well, that's interesting. I was talking to somebody I interviewed yesterday, and they were doing like they were using like a computer program to randomly generate words because they were like an experimental
Mm,
musician. And then I was saying, well, that's kind of like a word jam, but um, poetry. A lot of times, I'll go into my backlog of poetry when I was in my 20s, and
mm,
then take lines out of like 30 poems, and then kind of scramble,
mm.
just to be different. But yeah, it's interesting that I've talked to a lot of musicians over the last 3 years, and I would say 70% of them say that they pull lyrics from poetry they've written, which is kind of interesting.
Mm.
Um, so when you had a talent for music because you were already classically trained, but you decided you didn't want to go the classical route of being in an orchestra. You wanted to go more into pop or indie music.
Yeah, because I felt when I listened to songs, I had a very special connection with lyrics, especially, and I wanted to go write lyrics.
Yeah. Do you try to introduce any of your classically trained capability as playing, those playing strings and violin? Do you bring that into your new music, or you kind of stay away from it?
Yeah, I definitely try and mix and match the best parts of both of them, I guess. Um, so I sometimes when I'm producing a song, I will add a violin part that's more classical maybe, but it works with the pop
Hmm.
or folk style of whatever I'm writing.
Do you find like if you listen to like the Beatles, they used to introduce a lot of strings into their work in
Mm.
the '60s. Do you find your music, from my reading your bio, you're a mix of folk, country, classical, and pop, and that's kind of Beatle-esque in a way. Are you inspired? What type of artist are you inspired by? Who are your reference points?
So first of all, the first music I ever listened to was Suzanne Vega and Corinne Bailey Rae, and I think they really inspired me in terms of shaping my understanding of music and songwriting, because I just love songs that tell a story. And
Mm-hmm.
nowadays, some of my biggest inspirations are Hozier and Taylor Swift, because Hozier uses a lot of imagery and references in the lyrics, and Taylor Swift just has this ability to put very complex emotions into just very simple words. And these are things I try to get in my music as well. Um, I take a lot of inspiration from literature, and especially medieval poetry and epics.
Yeah, 'cause I see that you're going for a master's degree, so you're trying to bring
Yeah.
some of that into your music. Are you working on like themed projects that kind of take your medieval studies, or is there some of the work you're doing, it already probably has these components, but are you thinking of like kind of focusing on that on future projects?
I definitely try and take some ideas I see or some terms and phrases they use, because it's very it's very interesting to see how language evolved and how the way we look at things can be seen through language. So I take it in that form in my writing.
Yeah, it's interesting. 'Cause I'm an electronic musician, but I'm very drawn to Victorian poetry.
Mm.
So I take a lot of Blakean, like William Blake's ideas, his ideas like the tiger symmetry,
Yeah.
and ideas that he had, and a lot of his ideas. I got the celestials and all these. He used to do art. He used to etch
Yeah.
paintings with acid, and he had all these like really complicated, you know, kind of like mythological concepts. And then he
Mhm.
had a very simple poetry structure that it kind of relates to modern music. When you read Blakean poetry, it's kind of simple compared to like Wordsworth or Tennyson. But I always felt that was a good inspiration for a lot of the work I do. So it's interesting that you're going into medieval studies and finding inspiration there. I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I think just putting complex things into simple words is very powerful, especially when you're writing lyrics, because you want to keep it to the point.
Yeah, because sometimes you can get into, like, I'm a progressive musician, so I get drawn into like bands like Yes and Genesis, and they can kind of get a little overwrought,
Mhm.
but I still like that kind of progressive rock opera thing because I'm a keyboardist, I'm a synthesis, so we kind of go there. It's maybe a little excessive, but it's kind of that's where I live. Um, but I do understand that modern pop music, people want things a little more relatable. So it's kind of like it's always a kind of dynamic argument to try to create something that's progressive, but also can be accessible.
Mhm.
So that's always kind of like the fight. Do you find yourself, because you're dealing with complicated, themes and being able to mix genres about folk, country, and classical, but then make it seem kind of seamless? Is that easy? Does that come easy to you, or do you find that it's hard to actually compose, or it's naturally coming out of you?
I think it definitely takes some time for it to get easy. Um, Sometimes I just write very long poems and then I pick specific pieces of it that I like, that I think is just capturing the right thing, and make those lines into songs.
Yeah, the work to take a poem and turn it into a song is like you kind of have to deconstruct your poetry and find
Mhm.
what's going to work in that form. And it's like the raw material. I always go back to my poems and say, well, this is the raw material that I can use to create lyrics.
Yeah.
Do you feel that's like that's how you look at it, or you look at it a different way?
Yeah, because when I'm writing a poem, I don't stop and think to edit it. I just want to get out whatever I'm feeling across. And then
Hmm.
once I'm turning into a song, then I put the editing in.
Yeah, so that's where like to try to get the melody or get the refrains or you get the
Yeah.
different structures of a song. Like in a poem, like you go off, you could try to make your Iliad, you know,
Hmm.
or you try and do like or you're doing something that like Tennyson, like or Wordsworth, like at least what I'm drawn into Victorian poets, and that doesn't always work, yeah, as a song, but there's certain key lines that might work, and
Yeah.
then you can kind of figure out how to make that work with your BPM and your drum machines and your synthesis or your guitar playing. Like you have to find a space to fit it in.
Hmm.
Um, so, do you think of your songs like lyrically first, or do you come up with the music first, or is it a combination, or you just kind of go with what the muse gives you?
It's a combination. So sometimes I will have the lyrics and I will just try out a bunch of different chords over them, see what melody works. Or sometimes I will just have a melody in my head and I'll write lyrics to
Yeah, so it's kind of like I think I look at each song kind of like my children,
it.
and they kind of come out, they kind of get born, and they get created in different ways.
Yeah.
And you don't know how each one comes. Might be something that suddenly comes to you, or something that I have Moogs synthesizers, and they kind of bring me ideas when I
Mhm.
turn them on. Um, so when you play an instrument, do you have your melody in mind, or you kind of maybe you're just practicing, and does it come to you from just the kind of jamming or practicing, or you kind of plan it out and write it out?
So sometimes I will have the melodies strict in my head and I will write to it. Or sometimes I will just have my guitar be playing around with some chords and I'll be like, oh, this melody works.
Hmm. Now I know some people like they always put the tape on, or they got their phone. Like nowadays, a lot of people I've talked to, like musicians and vocalists in particular, they'll say, "Well, I got my cell phone with me, and I'm just walking down the street, and suddenly I get this idea, and I just do a voice memo." And so they always have kind of recorded. They don't have to actually go home. They could be taking a walk and then do it. Do you give yourself a specific time of day or space to do writing, or you kind of do the kind of voice memo thing wherever it happens?
I do the voice memo thing a lot, definitely. But in terms of actually sitting down and writing, if I have a song that I'm currently working on, then I will be like, all right, I have to make the time to work on this today. But if not, if I just get an idea and I'm in my room, I'll just get my guitar out and start writing.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's this voice memo thing that I call it, or we call it. It's a big thing with a lot of musicians. Like almost, I would say again, like out of all the people I've interviewed, especially the singers and
Hmm.
songwriters, they tend to use that tool a lot.
Yeah.
And then the traditional bands I've talked to, like rock based bands, they tend to like all get together in a studio and kind of write together, even in this modern DAW world. A lot of the kind of old school kind of rock structured bands still like that kind of song creation. After feeding off other people. But as a singer songwriter, you primarily do everything yourself, right? Or do you
Yeah.
work with producers?
I have worked with producers, but I also have been trying to produce my own music more recently. I'm still learning, but I think definitely
Mm-hmm.
the classical background comes in very handy in that.
So when you put together your music, you have like what you're like what we they call a lot of artists today like bedroom artists. They got their own home studio, and they kind of gets this idea of a bedroom artist where they got like their DAW, or they've
Mhm.
got their hardware recorders and synths and guitars. So do you use like a digital audio workstation, or you kind of just do like audio recordings of your guitar and then later put it into a DAW, or how do you actually compose?
Yeah, so once I'm finished with writing a song, I will record the guitar and the vocals and I'll put them into Logic and then I'll just go ahead and replay it over and over as I compose the backing instruments.
So you use digital
Yeah.
audio workstation. That's like the primary tool of most artists today. Though I'm a DAW-less recorder because I'm into analog synthesis. So a lot of the stuff I do, I like to capture onto either
Mm.
like like analog recording equipment or digital audio equipment that's still like hardware based. Just because the type of stuff I do is it's hard to capture modes in old analog synths and actually get the full sound of them, using some of the DAWs. Not that you can't do it, but I kind of like doing it old school, because I find it captures the sound a little better. But so what are your feelings like in the DAW? You say you're learning more about production. So are you diving into like all the capabilities of like a recording engineer level production? You're reading up and learning those techniques, or are you leaving the mastering and all that to other people?
I'm currently more focused on the instruments, but I am also trying to learn more about the mixing and mastering processes as well.
Yeah, and in today's age, with the whole thing, a lot of artists I've talked to, they're starting to dive more into it just because of the situation we're in with the coronavirus. A lot of artists that kind of depend on the studio, they're kind of stuck with their demos not being able to complete them, because they're dependent on people mastering them or going into the studio to finally finalize the album. So a lot of people are starting to say, well, I think I take this time to kind of learn some techniques.
Yeah.
So when you finish your project, do you give it over to a mastering service, or how do you fully complete your projects?
Definitely at this point giving it over to a mastering service, because until I learn it, I think it's best for the song.
Yeah, that's to get it out there, you have to use some service. I work with different ones. I'm actually signed to a label that has recording engineers, and they do it for me. But yeah, for a long time I used to do some of this stuff myself with some tools, but then lately I've been going through actually services that help me, because it is kind of an art in itself. If you go back, because I'm in my 50s, and when I first started playing, people, sound engineers and recording engineers, is kind of like the gate. You couldn't even do what we're doing today because you couldn't get your music in a position to get it out without going through like a label. Because you couldn't get access to the recording engineers. You could put stuff out on indie labels that didn't really have it mastered that well, but now today you have a lot more access. So what do you think about the whole streaming services out there today? The fact that you can get out there, but we really don't have the like label and artistic management support that artists used to have. It's a blessing and a curse in some ways. What are your feelings about that?
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's both. It's got its good sides and its bad sides. For one thing, I think it's great that anyone can put their art, their music out there, but at the same time, it's a bit, you do feel a bit misguided sometimes, like you don't know where to start.
Yeah, what I find is like I've had this kind of conversation where, after Napster happened and the iTunes store happened and then Spotify and all these places happened, it gave us access to the music, but it devalued, as a musician, we feel that a lot of times at least I feel that my music is not valued as much as a video game. Like a young person will pay $50 for an Xbox game, but they don't want to spend $9 for a CD. When I grew up, people would buy vinyl tapes and CDs, right? That's the only way you could get to music.
Yeah.
And now when you're an artist and you only get 0.006 of a penny for a stream, and you don't have people listening to albums, they're listening to playlists. So I grew up, getting like a Led Zeppelin album on vinyl and listening to it with 5 other friends in a basement, and kind of being like into like the whole vision of that artist as a concept. So I guess the question would be, like, in terms of music today seems to be more single oriented. And if you're an artist that's trying to do bigger ideas, do you find that to be kind of limiting, or how do you work with that?
Well, I think actually working just song by song as singles is also, it also has great creative potential, I think, because you get to, for example, I love designing the artwork for my singles, and it's an extra form of self-expression when you go song by song in terms of releasing, get to add a lot more story to just one song more than they would have in a big
Yeah,
album, for example.
that's interesting. No one's ever pointed that out. Yeah, all the people I've talked to was kind of, well, I don't get to do the full album concept, but you pointed out the good point of it. And I do release a lot of singles myself, and I do the art for my work, and I'm able to kind of create like the vision that I want people to associate with my music for each song. And on an album, you're kind of stuck with one image, unless you have a booklet or something, which is hard to do today. Because you used to be able to do liner notes and big booklets. When you release them electronically, they don't seem to give us that capability. And when you're a bigger artist, you can do it. But in the indie level, I haven't seen a lot of labels actually focus on artwork or lyrics or additional art that could be associated. And I think that's something that we could kind of push for as artists to be able to present when we do these singles, maybe PDFs that have more artwork. Because I've talked to a lot of artists that actually are multiple genre artists that have artwork or have ideas that could, be further pushed if we had a way to do that. Are you interested in that type of thing? I mean, the bigger level artists are able to do it, like the Taylor Swifts of the world, that she can put out like a book, a diary with her project. But if you're an indie level artist, you can't do that unless you put out a physical CD.
I think there are still different ways to approach it. So, for example, I make mood boards usually before I'm deciding the theme of a song, as in how it's going to be released. And I make them into posts on Instagram or Facebook. I use them to promote them. So, using each image to tell a story, except putting it out there online, has been my
Yeah,
way
I
of doing
mean,
it.
I think Instagram is one of the best platforms for musicians, just because it gives you the ability to do the little short clips, and then now you can do up to 10-minute clips. And so, like for all my music, I make a video, and I put it on Instagram as like a 10-minute video, and I do the little short ones. So I understand, like I would just kind of just point it out, but commercially, what you could do besides that, what you can do for free. Um, but yeah, as an artist, you take the capabilities that we have to put out there, and some of the stuff, it just becomes a promotional tool.
Yeah.
Maybe not an income stream tool, but yeah, it's interesting what you're doing with your music. We just talked about how you're primarily like working alone. Have you decided or ever worked with other people to collaborate with other bands or have features, or you're more like, I'm a singer songwriter, I'm going to stay within my own world, and you don't want to bring in other voices, or are you thinking about maybe having other people work with you?
As a matter of fact, I have recently done a collab with Insidia, and it will be coming out by the end of May. I really
Oh,
enjoyed
cool.
the collab process because, like you said, I thought I enjoy my private way of writing a song just alone on my bedroom floor at like 3 a.m. But I think there is also so much fun and so many possibilities when you're doing a collab, because it's very interesting to see how two different artists can approach the same work.
Yeah, so when you were a classical musician, you had to play with a whole like concert band, right?
Mm.
Or did you primarily play by yourself, or did you play with like a unit, like a quartet, or?
It was strings, so we had four violins, I believe, a cello, no, four second violins, four first violins, and a cello, yeah.
Yeah. So the cool thing about that is, like, so you've had the experience of kind of like what, rock band is, the kind of, when you have a bass player, drummer, singer, having that unit, the teamwork is kind of, I grew up with garage bands, bands actually playing in garages and basements and playing covers and stuff. And it's just something about when you actually play with other musicians, it changes the nature of your work. Because I used to be the main writer for my band, and I would write something out. And I'm a keyboardist, so I write the bass parts out. I do the chord charts. I do like everything because I could do it. But then when they gave it to the bass player, he would change it, and it was good because like he's a bass player. He's gonna take what I did and like, well, that's why I think the bass should be. But the bass player is really gonna play it because that's what he is. He's a bass player, and a drummer, same thing. He's gonna take what I wrote on a drum machine and really open it up. And I think that's the cool thing about collabing is like I've done a couple of myself over a couple of years, and I might get ready to work on a bigger project that I just got signed up for. It's always good when I'm primarily an indie artist myself, but when you work with other people, I think it just makes you a better musician over time. I think it just gives you more like ideas that maybe you didn't think about.
Yeah, definitely. It helps you see new perspectives that maybe you would never see, but if you were just working on your own.
Yeah, because sometimes you got to mix it up. Sometimes you have to kind of tear it down and start again. Because you could be going somewhere and say, well, this is working. And even if you're successful, they're famous musicians. They've been like, okay, I'm doing something. I keep on hitting in the top 10, but now I'm going to do something totally different. I don't know if my fans are going to come with me, but I just feel the need to do it. And I think that's always been exciting to me. I'm very much interested in artists that have that kind of risk taking. They like to change it up and just don't want to do the same thing over and over. But so part of the questions I ask about are what do you think the future of music is what the future is in the music industry, and also kind of also taking into account that a lot of artists can't play live venues anymore because of this situation. We don't know when we can get back to that. So what do you think where we're going to be?
Well, I think, well, these are very unpredictable times, but I think the best way to move forward is finding ways to stay connected and just keep doing what you love. So I've been taking the time to learn some more about classical composing and mixing and mastering, for example. I've started to perform online on Facebook or Instagram, and I believe in making the best of any situation, basically. So just accepting that there are things that I cannot control and just work on the things that I can control and hopefully just keep moving on.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I've been a Facebook Live performer like for like 3 years. I was doing it out of my bedroom studio, and people used to say, "Oh, what are you doing that for?" but but it's like now I'm kind of like people have been actually asking me. Other musicians sometimes ask me, "So, oh, how did you do that? What are you doing? What are you using?" And
Yeah.
because now everybody's got to do it. And I even went on Twitch. I started to go on Twitch and do stuff there because if you become like a Twitch partner, you actually can get an income stream. Not that that's the most important thing in the world, but there are ways musicians have to kind of look at it. If you can't get to a venue, if you go on Twitch and you build a big audience, you can actually become a partner and actually get an income stream coming in. And it's like the same as playing gigs. So there's a lot of people starting to look at that. And there's all these online concerts that are starting to happen. There's a couple that are like for benefits for firefighters or benefits for the police. Or so it's like what I've been seeing is like, okay, well, if you go and you help with some of these charities and become a performer on these online, charity live performances, it's another way to get your vision out there and actually help people. So there's a lot of cool things that are going on, and you don't have to say, "Well, I can't play the gig, so I don't know what to do." Yeah, you just kind of got to open yourself up to thinking about new things.
Yeah, definitely.
So you have some more work you're doing. We see your new single on Spotify. So your latest song that's out there, I was just looking at it, and we look at it a little bit more. Kaleidoscope.
Yes.
And that's the only So that song is your latest track, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you can talk about what that song means to you. I've seen the write up, but maybe you can kind of tell the audience like where you're coming from on the song and how you constructed it and what the feelings are and what you're trying to convey.
That was actually another song that started out as a poem and then I made it into lyrics because I started writing it when I was feeling a bit conflicted about who I was and how to tell people that. So I just put it into a song, and it was all about the emotions I felt around coming out, coming to terms with who I am, and also about my other friends who were going through similar experiences and what I thought I would want to hear during that process and what I would want to tell all those people who are going through the same conflicts about coming to terms with who they are.
Now, when you relayed this in your song, did you what was the kind of feedback you got from your followers or your audience? Was it supportive? Did people like write to you and said that they, you know, what was the feeling? What kind of feedback did you get?
Yeah, it was definitely positive because I think a lot of people relate to that idea of both wanting to scream it from the rooftops, but also being terrified that you're going to be judged about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's cool. Like what one thing I love about singer songwriters is the honesty that you get, and the ability to, you know, have make political statements or make social statements, and to kind of be, you know, music to me a lot of times is like reading a great American novel,
Mm-hmm.
or a great novel, right? So if I like reading Faulkner or something, like it's like when you get a really great artist, you get a big, like a window into their soul in a way if they're honest. So I was always drawn to like Kurt Cobain because I felt like, well, he's really being very, you know, open in what he was doing, and it felt honest compared to what was going on in that time. You had all these hair bands in Los Angeles, and it felt kind of fake, and it felt like these are like corporate created bands. And then you had the grunge movement where it kind of brought it back to like a punk aesthetic
Mm-hmm.
that had more honesty. You had the Eddie Vedder, you know, being very honest and open and talking about things,
Mm-hmm.
political things again. You know, kind of bringing up a Dylan kind of era again, um, in music where the lyrics actually meant something. So I've always been drawn to singer songwriters because they tend to be the type of people that make art and music that make you feel something. So I think you're in that category with what you're doing.
Oh, thank you.
Because I've always been. I mean, sometimes people want music and they want just a beat and they want to have fun and
Mm-hmm.
they want to dance, and that's cool. And there's a place for that. You know, I grew up in the disco era. I grew up in the funk era. You know, I love Pollard and Funkadelic and James Brown and get into a groove. But sometimes you need somebody to actually say something. Um, and I think in these times, I think they're going to be more focused on people wanting to heal and feel something. You know, people want to party; they always want to party, but I think people are
Yeah.
going to want something a little bit more substantial based on what's going on. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so, is Kaleidoscope just a single project, or is it part of a project you were going to be putting out in 2020?
Kaleidoscope on its own is a single project.
But are you working on additional music? Would this Kaleidoscope be part of a like an EP, or is it its own thing, its own project?
I think Kaleidoscope is its own thing, but the music I'm currently working on will be part of a bigger project that tells one story.
Oh, okay. So Kaleidoscope will kind of stand on its own. It wouldn't
Yeah,
be included in the new project.
no, yeah.
Yeah, that's what why I like the freedom of being an artist today is like you can put these EPs out, you can put all these singles out, and they kind of stand on their own. So you
Mm-hmm.
can have, you know, you don't have to like, okay, well I can't put this out because it doesn't go with the album. You know, that was kind of a limitation in the past. You know, you could only put out what would fit on a vinyl, you know, or would fit on tape, or what fits on a CD, and now you're kind of not limited.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have some artists they'll put out 2 hour projects. You know, they're not limited by the medium. If they don't, if they want to, they can. So are you working on something that's more of an EP or an album length project? Or what would your fans know about what you're doing for 2020?
So the current project that I'm working on is going to be 4 parts. They won't be in one EP or album or a group, but more almost like chapters of a book or like volumes of a book that come out one after another,
Oh,
kind of
well, that's
telling a
interesting.
story.
Yeah, back in the 70s, there were some bands that did stuff like that. They would do like multiple part stories type, put things together like that. And that's, a lot of jazz bands do that too. Like if you go to the Coltrane, is a big picture of that, part one, part two, part three of A Love Supreme. um, that I've always been drawn to like jazz bands like Sun Ra and Coltrane and Davis, because the experimentation and the ability to kind of do that kind of format is somewhat drawn into things like like Parliament Funkadelic and Frank Zappa. They used to do very amazing cross genre stuff. Zappa especially, he had the ability to have orchestration, and he could actually write, and he would direct orchestras on his material, which is, and he would do all these really innovative musical styles that for a rock band was kind of way beyond what rock bands were doing. So I've always been interested in people who do that kind of mixture. And so with your folk and country and classical, and now your medieval studies, I think I'll be watching what you're doing for a while. So you're out on SoundCloud, you're on YouTube, you've got videos you've produced. Now the videos you produced, did you work with anybody to do that, or is that all you?
I did get some help from friends, but the editing and the planning was me. Yeah.
So are you working on more video, like because you're in the situation, or you're not able to get the video because of kind of lockdown situation, or are you able to still do it?
I am
Video type production.
I am able to still do it, but obviously there are limitations because can't travel anywhere.
Yeah, to
But
get
just
outside,
trying to work around those basically.
And you have your own website that we're going to include all the links to your social media. And do you have like a target date for any of your new material that's coming out?
Not at the moment.
Okay. But we will be able to push what you have out there now. And your latest single, it just came out at the beginning of the year, right?
Yeah,
Kaleidoscope,
around February.
February. So were you gonna actually do live shows for your music this year before all this happened, or you were primarily more of a streaming artist and you weren't going to do live? Did you have like a vision for doing your stuff live?
Yeah, because before this entire lockdown happened, I would always go around pubs around Egham or Andover or Salisbury and just perform live almost every week. So it's
Okay,
been
so
a
you
big
did have a
change.
presence. Yeah, so did you have like a fan base that's used to you doing it would say that you do more like acoustic unplugged performances, or do you have additional help
Mostly
in
just
terms of like a
acoustic.
band backing
Mm,
you up?
No, I haven't
Yeah,
actually
so like,
worked with a band.
oh, you have?
No, I haven't actually.
Oh, you have? Yeah, so you're doing more like a folk singer, like
Yeah.
a Dylan or a Neil Young or type of Joan Baez type of performance, where old school 70s
Mm.
coffee house kind of that kind of vibe.
Yeah. The first place I
Hipster,
performed at was a coffee
hipster.
house.
Yeah, well, I kind of started like doing Northampton, Massachusetts, outside of like um, um, a bunch of like colleges. There's like a 5 college system, and you've got like Mount Holyoke, and you've got all these like big colleges, and they had this kind of coffee house scene. And when I was in my 20s, that's what I used to go read poetry at these coffee houses, and then I started integrating my synthesizers with the poetry, and started doing that since that time. And it was always those crowds, the college crowd, the college radio crowd, back before the net. They were the kids, the people that would support artists that were doing weird experimental things. um, so today that audience has gotten bigger. Now you can reach the whole world in that way. And so I find that you used to have to travel to New York City to get to a show, and now I can do a show on Twitch or Instagram or Facebook, and I can reach 5,000-6,000 people, where in a club I could only reach maybe 100 to 300 people. So I think it's how you look at it. You can potentially get to a bigger audience from your bedroom.
True.
Yeah, so that's what people got to see is like, okay, being in a van and touring the whole U.S. in a van is cool, but in the modern world, you could reach the whole world, and you move up to a tour bus. But yeah, so we're excited that you were on the show today, and we're gonna push this out. We are part of Spotify. Anchor FM is part of Spotify, so this will be on Spotify as well as 10 other platforms when we push it out, and we'll give you the link so you can share with all your fans. We do have good integration with Instagram, and so we will put a highlight on our Instagram that actually links to the Spotify version of this podcast. And so when people click on that highlight, it will go right to the podcast.
Oh, perfect.
And so that's another way of pushing this out. We're happy that you came on the show today. Everybody, when we put this out, we're going to have a bunch of hyperlinks to Regina Fae's work. Please click on them and support your favorite artist and support Regina Fae. And we hope to have you on the show when you have more work to discuss. We have people coming on our show like multiple times. We've had artists that we've interviewed. So we thank you for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. Regina Fae, everyone. Check her out on all the streaming services and the links that we provide. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.